Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's Network Opportunity Maps webinar. My name is John Philpotts from Energy Networks Australia. On behalf of everyone on this afternoon's call, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for making the time as we demonstrate our Network Opportunity Maps. We have quite a few people on the line this afternoon with us. I'd like to say a welcome just briefly on behalf of Energy Networks Australia and ISF and our many sponsors who will outline in a bit more detail in a moment. We will make this afternoon session as interactive as possible, so at any point if you do have a question relevant to the presentation, please do type that in to the chat box. If it's relevant and we're able to, we'll try and address questions as we go. However, we will have a dedicated question and answer time at the end of the session as well. So if we don't answer your questions as we go through, then please hang in there and we will get to them at the end of the session today as well. Briefly this afternoon, we will be outlining a bit of background of the project, how we've gotten to where we are now. We'll demonstrate the latest capabilities in the maps and actually conduct a live demonstration before we get to our Q&A sessions. And please do keep the questions coming through as we go through this session. At this point, I'll hand over to Stuart Johnston, who just do a general welcome. And a quick message before I do, there will be a recorded message in a moment that will play on behalf of ARENA. Unfortunately, that's only available through the web platform. If you're on the phone dialing in, you may not be able to hear that. However, if you are able to access the link in advance of that recording, we do encourage you to do that. But bear with us if you are unable to hear that video, hang in there and we'll come back on the line at the end of that recording. Anyway, without further ado, I'll hand over to Stuart, who will welcome us all this afternoon. Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks, John. On behalf of Energy Networks Australia, I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar to launch the next iteration of the Network Opportunity Maps. Today's map launch is the culmination of a 3-year research project by the Institute for Sustainable Futures, ISF, at the University of Technology, Sydney, in collaboration with Energy Networks Australia. The maps were developed with the support from the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, as well as other key stakeholders such as CSIRO through Data 61, which is Australia's leading digital research network, the New South Wales Government, and industry partners such as Ergon Energy, AusNet Services, PowerLink, Electronet and Transgrid. These organisations were crucial in ensuring this project was so successful in delivering the maps. I'm also happy to mention that to ensure that these maps stay relevant and continue to be updated and evolve, Energy Networks Australia, with the backing of our member businesses, has taken on the responsibility for the ongoing management of the maps. Energy Networks are excited about the potential for these maps to help build a smarter and more reliable grid and enabling alignment of customer assets to avoid spending more on poles and wires in the future. The NOM provides detailed information, including identification of some of the emerging constraints in the grid, and will help encourage local renewable energy, battery storage and other smart demand management across the energy grid to actually alleviate some of those constraints. The online mapping tool also offers the promise of a spatially relevant interactive platform to share relevant information and content with our key stakeholders and the public in ways that haven't been possible just a few short years ago. As such, the maps will play a key role in making the network-related data more transparently available to the marketplace and enable our members to engage and interact with the customers in a more efficient and dynamic way. And hopefully to support the development of sustainable LNG solutions. As part of the new iteration of the maps, it should be noted that we have built in new features to simplify future updates by upgrading the process of data collection for future updates, and we hope that this will lead to shortened time periods moving forward between updates. Finally, before I hand over to Chris and I think it's the video next actually, I'd like to thank all of the great work that the ISF team has done in developing the maps. The ISF team should be commended for the dedication they have shown in developing this product, and I'm happy to say that we'll be continuing to work with Chris and his team going forward to ensure the maps continue to evolve and deliver for both members and the customer. Thank you again for joining today's webinar, and hopefully you'll get a lot of value out of the information and demonstration that will now follow. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. We do have a recording from Ivor Krishnek on behalf of ARENA, who wasn't able to join us today, who wanted to welcome you all as well, and also note ARENA's contribution to this program. So we'll play that video now, and if you're on the phone, unfortunately, I'm afraid you won't be able to hear it. Bear with us, and we'll be back online in just a moment. Thanks.
Hello, and thank you for attending the Network Opportunity Map webinar, otherwise known as the NOM webinar. I apologize for my absence today. However, I'm very pleased to celebrate the continuation and handover of the NOM as we know it. ARENA has worked successfully with the ENA, the ISF, and UTS over the years and provided funding to all of them. And when we initially supported the NOM, we knew that it was a much-needed resource for the energy market. Accurate information is fundamental to building a cost-effective, reliable, and low-emissions energy future. However, such information has been limited when it comes to network constraints, costs, and potentially avoidable investment across the NEM. Thankfully, the maps respond to this limitation by providing clear, detailed, and easily accessible information about battery storage, energy efficiency, and smart demand management in the grid. Now, in 2017, there have been new additions to the maps. I will leave the details of these new additions for later in the webinar. Easily accessible information about battery storage, energy efficiency, and smart demand management in the grid. Now, in 2017, there have been new additions to the maps. I will leave the details of these new additions for later in the webinar. As the NOM is passed into the capable Industry Association hands of the ENA, we have no doubt that the ENA will champion the project and results. So on behalf of the team here at ARENA, we wish you all the best, and we will definitely be watching this space.
Okay, apologies there. It seems we did have some problems with people hearing that message through their web platform. There will be a recording of this, and we will make that available after today's session. So apologies if you're unable to hear that. We do thank ARENA for their contribution in sponsoring the initiation of this platform, and are very thankful for Ivor and ARENA's contribution to this whole process. I'll pass now to Chris Dunstan at ISF, who will also note the many sponsors who've made this program a success. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks very much, John. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for sharing some time with us this afternoon. Firstly, I would just like to thank the ENA for being such a terrific partner in this project over the last few years, and also for stepping up to take over the hosting of the Network Opportunity Maps. And we look forward to the further development and success of the maps in Energy Networks Australia's capable hands. I'd also like to acknowledge the contribution and support of Ivor and his team at ARENA, without whom this clearly couldn't have happened, and all of our partners, including in particular those that provided funding support that meant that we could proceed, such as the New South Wales Government, Ergon Energy, and the rest of our partners, with some fabulous in-kind contributions. Finally, while I'm in the process of acknowledging people, I really do need to acknowledge the terrific team that we've had working on this over several years now at ISF. There's probably too many to name, but I would like to particularly acknowledge Ed Langham, who's been the project manager, has done such a fantastic job. So thanks, Ed. So what I wanted to do now is provide you some context around these maps and the environment in which they are operating. So, so as this project is about visualization of data, I'd like to ask you for a moment to just pause, and when I mention the terms the electricity system, ask you what sort of images come to mind in terms of the electricity system, and in particular the electricity supply system. And as you do that, I'd like to then ask you to think about how that changes, or how you see that changing in the years ahead. Particularly as we move into what we've described as the new decentralized energy ecosystem. And these are a few images that really come to the fore when I think about these issues. So, of course, the rise of decentralized energy generation, in particular renewables in the form of solar PV, the early emergence of battery technology in terms of standalone batteries, but equally importantly, and arguably even more importantly in the years to come, batteries on wheels in the form of electric vehicles. And then the aspects of our decentralized energy ecosystem that are at least as important, but don't often get quite as much press. The central image there of the improvement in energy efficiency. And then finally, on the right-hand side, an image about smart energy management. And with what we see here, I think there's plenty of evidence to look to these resources represented here as providing all of the growth in our requirements for energy, in terms of electricity and in terms of capacity in the decades to come. So this new electricity sector it's an evolution. It's building on the tenets of the past, but we're seeing a very dramatic transition. So it's no longer just about centralized generation. It's about decentralized generation. A move from more centralized control to not just decentralized control, but a greater need for coordination. Whereas in the past, it was a lot about forecasting demand and then building to meet that demand. Now it's equally about managing that demand when we match supply and demand. Whereas in the past it was, okay, we've established how much capacity we need, how do we build the least cost infrastructure? In the future, it's much more about how do we get a least cost mix of supply and demand side resources, including those resources I was just talking about a few minutes earlier. And then finally, but perhaps most importantly, a fundamental change in engagement with customers from a paradigm in which customers were very much at the end of the supply chain and passive receivers of energy to a paradigm in which there'll be very extensive engagement with customers by the electricity sector and by customers with a range of players, and that includes retailers and service providers. So in this new paradigm, in this new decentralized energy ecosystem, how do we ensure that we deliver a win-win for customers and for the network? And in doing that, I think it's quite clear that better information and collaboration are absolutely crucial, and that's exactly what we're focused on with the network opportunity maps. In terms of illustrating some of the background for the things I've just been describing, what I've presented here is the forecast of energy consumption over the next 20 years. And there's a number of things that are particularly striking in this image. One is that, as in the past, we've seen a gradual growth in energy consumption, but now we're seeing, in terms of the amount of energy delivered through the grid, that's flattened out. And all of the underlying growth in demand for energy is being met by, in particular, three decentralized energy options: rooftop PV, improvements in the energy efficiency of equipment, and changes in behaviour, which are leading to greater efficiency of energy use. And these factors collectively mean that we are not anticipating a growth in the underlying energy supply through the main grid beyond the peak back in 2008, right throughout the next 20-year period. And that's a fundamental transition that we've seen. To look at that, that same data from another perspective, this is looking at the shift in how generation sources have changed in the national electricity market. So there's that striking decline in coal consumption in the mix, gas a little bit up and down, hydro mainly through Snowy and through Tassie Hydro being about the same, but the growth in supply coming from renewable sources. And so of that roughly 200 terawatt hours per annum that's supplied through the national electricity market, that's been relatively flat, but we're seeing a number of other factors coming to the fore. Further to that contribution of renewables, we're expecting to see a further 12 terawatt hours of renewable energy over the next 4 years through the renewable energy target. In addition to that, about 6 terawatt hours from small-scale solar, and at the same time, a decline in the amount of coal generation in the mix. The recent close of Hazelwood, the expected closure of Liddell Power Station in a few years, and a further 9 power stations that have closed in the last 4 years. So this trend is, if anything, likely to accelerate. What this image illustrates is the point at which the existing power stations in our electricity grid are reaching a retirement age of about 50 years over the next few decades. So over there on the left-hand side, you can see Hazelwood closing. Liddell is the next one as we move out to about 2022. And then in this period between 2028 and 2033, as much as 60% of our current coal-fired generation mix is expected to reach the end of its economic life. So that's going to be a massive transition. As I said, it's a transition that's already underway, and it's one that we need to prepare for. And it's clear that the cheapest new energy resources, in terms of the amount of energy they provide and the cost of that energy, is through renewables. But it's not a matter of set and forget that everything will be fine, renewables come to the rescue, because they are fundamentally different in the way they operate. Wind is clearly a very variable resource. Similarly, solar is very variable. So for the new energy ecosystem, the new electricity system that is going to emerge over the next decade or so, we need to be able to respond to this change in the generation mix. And one way of capturing this challenge is what has now become quite popularly called the duck curve. What this graph shows you is the change in the load curve between 2012, which is the grey curve at the top there, and each year a reduction in demand in the middle of the day as a result, in particular, of solar PV generation. And then as the sun goes down, the underlying growth in demand is leading to a higher peak. So this has a number of challenges to it. One is simply the fact that we've got low demand in the middle of the day. The other is that we've got higher demand later in the day, in the early evening. But also we've got this quite dramatic shift as the amount of demand on the main grid peaks, or accelerates quite rapidly in the late afternoon. So from an Australian point of view, that image that I just showed you was from California, but we're seeing a similar sort of phenomena here. This is a forecast, again, out over the next 20 years, showing the trend not in maximum demand, but in minimum demand. So we can see that it's falling quite dramatically down towards zero. And to make the point even more dramatically, if we look at South Australia, over that forecast period, by about 2030, there's an expectation that the total net demand on the grid in South Australia will actually fall into negative territory. That because of the contribution of solar PV, there will be more power being generated by consumers than is needed by the entire state. So these shifts in demand patterns are one of the major challenges that we face in the decade or two ahead. But it's not the only challenge. We've also seen quite a dramatic increase in electricity prices over the last little while, driven to a large degree by the closure of those 10 coal-fired power stations that I mentioned. Hazelwood was particularly prominent in the news recently with the closure in March of this year, but it's actually a combination of a number of phenomena, in particular those 10 coal-fired power stations closing. And while we're going through a particularly difficult phase now, even as we look out over the next 4 or 5 years, the price of electricity is expected to remain higher than we've seen for the last 20 years. So that means we've got issues in terms of reliability, we've got issues in terms of cost. And to the body that's responsible for providing us with our understanding of energy forecasts and where the market is going, AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator, predicting a capacity shortage in 23-24 at the time of the expected closure of Liddell. But we're also facing a similar constraint this coming summer. So the question is, how do we get the right mix of flexible resources to complement the centralised resources that are there in order to maintain a reliable and an affordable electricity system? That means we need to tap into those decentralised resources around demand response, time of use tariffs, smarter controls, but also around energy efficiency and, where we can, tapping into peak-oriented renewable energy. Collectively, that range of decentralised energy resources. The potential there, particularly on the demand side, is really quite enormous. This is a slide from the Australian Energy Market Commission's Power of Choice review back in 2012, indicating that over the next 10-year period, there's the potential for those demand-side resources associated with time of use or efficient pricing of demand response and energy efficiency, potentially providing benefits worth up to $12 billion. Question is, how do we tap them? So in terms of the costs that are driving our electricity bills, there are a number of dimensions, but a key element, and this is, I guess, where the role of networks really comes to the fore. From our perspective at ISF, we see networks as playing not a lesser role, but in fact a more important role in the future of the electricity system, but it's a dramatically different one. And it's about facilitating those low-cost, decentralised energy resources in the right sort of mix to support the demand on the grid at different places in accordance with the constraints at different times of the day and different times of the year. And as illustrated in this graph here, networks comprise a bit over 40% of our power bills. And if we can reduce the peak demand on the grid, we can reduce the need for new investment and, in some cases, replacement investment, and help to put lower pressure on electricity prices, not just from network prices, but by ensuring a flatter load curve and more decentralised energy, putting downward pressure on wholesale electricity prices as well. But in order to do that, we need to understand where the opportunities in the network are to address those constraints as they emerge. So those network costs are highly locational and season specific, and we really need to have an understanding of where they are and when they're occurring, and we need to do that ahead of time so we can respond. So that's all I wanted to say by way of context for the project. And at this point, I'll now pass over to Ed Langham to talk you through some of the details of the project. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Chris. Now, you can see that where we started with this project, we had a series of research questions that were where we really wanted to know where are the most cost-effective opportunities for decentralized energy in our grid. We also wanted to know how much could decentralized energy be worth at those particular locations, and we wanted to know when are the key years and the times of constraint. So these are the key questions that drove us to create the network opportunity map. And so we went out there and did so, and once we had actually built our mapping prototype, we actually had a lot of stakeholder feedback that said, actually, while you're there, we would really like to know where and how much new generation capacity can we actually connect to the existing network. So that's an additional question that we've come back to bolt on to the family of network opportunity maps, and that's what we can answer with what we'll demonstrate here today. So where we landed was that we needed a resource to show when and where to target renewable energy and decentralized energy technologies and services. And crucially, that had to be annually updated through a streamlined process so that it maintained current and relevant into the future as an ongoing industry resource, wasn't something that came and then faded away again. And so that is the basis upon which these maps were made, that there are annual planning information that's updated each year. But we also, with our new maps on generator connections, actually needed to produce maps much faster than that, and those maps are going to be updated on demand as they're required by the network business when circumstances change. So the other factor that we needed to consider is that it had to be consistently applied across every jurisdiction in the national electricity market. So that's to make sure that private service providers that are working across jurisdictions, whether they're operating in South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, wherever, can actually come and access this information in a single, consistent way without having to go through different processes and look in 10 different websites to dig out these pieces of information. It also needed to be freely available. That was one of our criteria, freely available on an online platform, and we've chosen Data 61's the renewable energy mapping infrastructure, which is a fantastic site with a whole host of other data, which really amplifies the power of the network opportunity map, which you'll see soon. And finally, and ultimately, it's something that the network opportunity map should be woven into networks' demand-side engagement strategies. That's jargon for how the industry jargon for how the network businesses communicate with their service providers and customers. And we're probably not at that point yet, but that's where we need to make these maps head over the long term. And it's fantastic that Energy Networks Australia has taken the helm with these maps, which is the prerequisite for that occurring. So these are some example users that we had in mind when we were creating these maps. A lot of them focus around service providers in this new energy ecosystem that are looking to geo-target customer acquisition and to be able to, what a lot of people call value stack. So to be able to obtain network value to make their customer offer more attractive. And so there's the types of users are, solar and battery companies, accredited energy efficiency providers under state-based certificate schemes, for example, or demand response aggregators. It's also useful to government relating to program energy efficiency or peak-focused program or incentive design, and also the categories that focus around supply side and generation, new generation. So community groups looking at developing, say, community scale renewable energy like bioenergy or solar, or a private solar farm developer prospecting for new sites. So I think these are all our formal sponsors, as you've seen, and we really thank everyone for their time and funding to be able to make this project possible. But beyond our sponsors and contributors, we've actually had data supply and cooperation from every single network business in the national electricity market, which has been absolutely fantastic over the past 3 years to get us where we are today. So we really thank all our data suppliers as well as our sponsors and contributors. So this is, as Chris mentioned, it's a culmination of a 3-year research project. This is the project timeline. We started with a set of sample maps in 2015, built to full coverage maps last year, and now this is the fully featured, streamlined version of the full coverage maps being released in 2017. And beyond the completion of this project is where the industry adoption comes in, and where Energy Networks Australia's role is in taking these maps forward in an ongoing way. And you can see here that we've just bolted on the generator connection opportunities as a variation to the project, just coming in the 3rd year. So what we're trying to do here is influence the way that that information is able to help the market operate. So this is an example timeline I'm going to show you with the regulatory investment test for distribution versus the network opportunity map. So say you have a 5-year time horizon with an investment decision in 2017. Under a traditional RIT-D process, there's a request for tenders for non-network services that comes out prior to that investment decision. So there might actually sort of be 6, maybe 9 months of activity looking to getting private service providers to prepare proposals. So it's a very sort of short window of opportunity. But what we're trying to do here with the network opportunity maps is to improve market foresight and activity to sort of 5 years and beyond, so that information is out there. Everyone can see it coming. They can see how it changes each year, so that we actually have more of a chance to develop these smaller, more piecemeal distributed energy opportunities. So we will start here now with a bit of the first introduction to the map, just being a layer explainer. What are you actually seeing when you go onto the AREMI site, which is www.nationalmap.gov.au and /renewables. And when you start, you'll actually get a disclaimer the first time you use the maps, which basically says this data is indicative and provided for the benefit of the market, but not to solely base investment decisions on this alone, but rather to use it as a starting point to inform your development of opportunities as a starting point for conversation with the network business. And that's really how our data suppliers view the network opportunity map as a lubricator of the relationship between the market and network businesses. So this is the most recent addition, the Generation Connection Opportunities Map, the most recent addition to the NOM family, thanks to our key partners ARENA, AusNet Services, PowerLink, Transgrid and Data61 for their fantastic work on the development. This is the first time anyone has seen it. This map shows the indicative capacity that the existing network has to handle the connection of new generation. So this is information that would generally be obtained via an initial connection inquiry process that could take weeks or months and might result in a community group or a renewable energy developer completely rethinking at what scale or where they actually site their generator. So this new layer really provides that first pass information up front, making things faster and easier for both the proponent and the network business as well. And in addition to our core partners for this layer, huge thanks to our data suppliers. What you're looking at on this map, you also have Victorian transmission data from AEMO. We have Actu-AGL, PowerCore, Electronet, and Essential Energy is what you're seeing here in this zoomed out version. So let's just zoom in a little bit to a New South Wales view where we see a mix of transgrid, essential and ActU-AGL data. So the dots that you see here are substations. They're transmission, sub-transmission or distribution zone substations. And the lines that you see are sub-transmission lines. So they are all color-coded according to this legend over here on the left. You can see the laser pointer over here on the left. And so where there's the blue are large amounts of available capacity in sort of the hundreds or thousands of megawatts, and the orange and red being relatively little available connection capacity in sort of the ballpark of 0 to 5 megawatts. And the key thing with this layer is that network businesses needed to have it updated on demand rather than annually. So it's managed via an online upload platform that publishes directly to the maps once the business hits approve. So that if a 10 megawatt solar farm is committed this week, then that's the data that you see as a user can quickly reflect that. So if you click on any asset, you will see a range of information. You'll see what it is, its voltage level. In this case for Dubbo West, that the indicative available capacity is about 23 megawatts in this circumstance. And we can also see that this figure accounts for thermal limitations only. And it doesn't actually consider voltage and stability considerations, which might be assessed in a later, more detailed assessment. So each business that provides data actually uses their own methodology, which might consider different factors. Some businesses consider all of those factors, others only consider thermal, and it's all laid out for you here in the info boxes. Okay, so the next map we have is available distribution capacity. So what you're looking at here is a whole series of polygons, and those polygons are the distribution zone substation region service boundaries. So what this map shows is the capacity of the existing network assets at the zone substation level to be able to meet forecast load growth over the coming decade. So, and I've said the coming decade, what you can actually see, note my laser pointer here, is down the bottom, there's actually a time slider. So the map that we're actually viewing in this slide is 2025. Out here in the future, but if you click on any point during this timeline, you can get a different picture of what the circumstance is in at that particular time. So what available capacity is pretty simple. It's just the current zone substation capacity minus the forecast peak demand. And what you're looking at here are the green areas where there's sufficient capacity, and the red areas where there's a capacity shortage and an impending need to do something about it. So these are the areas that will need either network augmentation or demand management to actually alleviate that constraint. So there's actually constraints at a whole number of different levels of the network. This is just zone substation information, and they're generally not represented below that level. However, AusNet have actually experimented with this year, showing distribution feeder level shapes, and I'll show you this a little later in the live demo. Really, the observations in this map is quite similar to last year's data, which show a lot less red than you would have seen in this map 5 years ago, because there's owing to relatively recent investments in new network capacity at a time when load forecasts that started to taper off. And the exceptions here are some residential growth corridors around our major cities, and also in Victoria, which is where you see this sort of red patch down here, where there's probabilistic planning criteria that apply an asset to run harder under higher load before an augmentation is made. Now we've got our proposed investment map. So this layer shows the locations of proposed investment to meet these impending constraints. So this layer covers augmentation, but it also includes replacement and refurbishment. And this year, users are actually able to select the display variable, and there's a whole bunch of different choices you can make. This was not previously possible. It's one of the new features. So the default is the year of investment. So you can see that the red investments are the ones that are imminent and about to occur. The green ones are sometime out into the future. But you can also specify to view by asset type to determine what transmission, what zone substation, what feeder. You can look at the constraint season, whether or not it's summer or winter peaking or both. You can look at the investment driver, be it augmentation or replacement, and when you click a particular asset, you'll find a whole bunch of information about it here, which is, I think, the largest augmentation investment in the data set this year. We see an Electronet $200 million transmission line with $120 million of that specified as deferrable. So that's happening in 2022, but there's a commitment year that you can see quite soon in 2018. So there's often some more detailed information about the constraint in this box as well. It depends on the network business. And the final and perhaps most useful one of all of these is deferrable investments. So this is where the network specifies what's deferrable or avoidable, and it will, if you click this, it will actually grey out if it's not deferrable. And so you can quickly see the investments for which non-network alternatives present potential money on the table. Now, our next one then combines the load situation that you saw in the first map and the investment situation that you saw in the second map to create what is our key opportunity hotspot layer called annual deferral value. So this shows what it's worth to connect, what it's worth to the network to defer that investment for a given year. So to do that, we take the proposed network or the deferrable component of the proposed network investment. We take the weighted average cost of capital, so the interest that would have accrued on financing that asset and the avoided depreciation that wasn't incurred from an asset that's not yet built. And you put those things together and you get an annual value of deferring augmentation in sort of dollars per year. But then we actually have to think about how much work is required to actually achieve that deferral. So we divide that by the non-network support requirements in each year in kVA terms. And so we get this annual deferral value, which is a marginal value per kVA of avoided growth. So dollars per kVA per year if that deferral is successfully achieved. Now, this is what that map actually looks like. So this is the area of Greater Sydney. And so you can see the legends over the side here, where you've got white and yellow areas are relatively low values, and your reds and purples are quite high values in dollars per kVA, up sort of around the $500 per kVA per year mark. And what this is not what the network is willing to pay for demand management, but it shows you the marginal cost of the preferred network option, which gives you an indication of the upper limit that the network business could invest in demand management and still save money. So, and this one is also a data set that has 10 years worth of information in it. So down here on the bottom, we have the time slider. This particular image is about 2021, as you can see what's selected near my marker there. So the value that you see in these maps is mapped to the zone substation areas. It also includes the value of upstream transmission and sub-transmission deferrals that are then passed down to the areas in which demand management could be effective that are actually connected to that upstream asset. So in the case here of Sydney, we actually see a whole bunch of zones in the inner city area that I'm circling here. And those all actually have the same colour, and the reason for that is that they all relate to Transgrid powering Sydney's future project. And so demand management can be equally effective if applied in any of those connected downstream zones. So you actually sort of see the value stack of any distribution, of any sort of zone substation, any sub-transmission, any transmission, all added together in this map. And this is the information that you get when you click on any particular asset, where you will see the annual deferral value and the amount of support required in any given year to achieve that, which is both tabular and the new graphing features that Data 61 has added as well. So the question is, these values are all very nice in dollars per kVA per year, but how do you actually use it? How do you apply the annual deferral value? I'll just give you a quick example. So say there was a $10 million network investment driven by a commercial cooling summer peak constraint at 2 in the afternoon. It requires 2.5 MVA per year of non-network support to actually be able to achieve that deferral. And so in this case, say the value on the map is $400 per kVA per year. And the proponent in this zone substation area is looking at developing a 3 MVA gas trigeneration system, which delivers 3 MVA of electrical generation, as well as 0.75 MVA of an offset to cooling demand within the building. And so you get 3.75 MVA summer afternoon peak reduction, so which could plausibly achieve a 1.5-year deferral of that asset. So the way you apply it is to say, okay, let's take that $400 per kVA per year, multiply it by 2,500 kVA, so the amount of support required, by 1.5 years. And so when you multiply that out, you get a total value of $1.5 million. And that's essentially, that means that firm generation of this scale is worth up to $1.5 million to the network business. So the network business will want to actually have a more efficient solution than the network option, so they'll want to spend less than this amount, and they'll also run it through a competitive process, meaning they get the best value outcome with the lowest possible cost of distributed energy options. But this just gives you an indication that you could then, that this generator might want to start factoring in a possible value stream of between, say, $500,000 and 1.5 million or thereabouts of a network revenue stream if it was to want to enter into contract with the network to deliver that supply. Now, our final map is peak day available capacity. So our augmentation investments in the network are undertaken to avoid peak demand reaching capacity of network infrastructure, but that tends to only happen for a few hours a year. And so it's actually really useful to show the timing and the magnitude of the constrained hours on the peak day. So if, say, a user has identified a particular annual deferral value opportunity that they want to dig further into, this map layer shows the percentage of capacity. So you can see in the legend over here, or that could also be termed the asset utilization for each hour of the locally relevant peak day. So in some zones, you might be looking at a summer peak day, and in some zones, you might be looking at a winter peak day. This layer also has a time slider down here, but it's not for 10 years this time. It's for 24 hours from midnight to midnight. So you've got, we can see this particular slice, we have selected 5 p.m. So anything that is red here has an area that's exceeding capacity at 5 p.m. and those in green are not. And when you click on any given zone, you get a whole host of information and a really nice peak day load graph. And so you can really just navigate around here and see the peak day load shape of any of these assets in the national electricity market, which has never been possible in such an easy way before. So now we are going to shift to a live demo of the map. So I will just start screen sharing and click over to a browser. So now we are here at nationalmap.gov.au/renewables. This is the ARENI platform. So what we can do when we start this and it opens up is click on the map up here in the top right, and you can choose any of the available maps. So you can select in 2D or 3D, and not all of our layers are actually available in 3D, so we generally use 2D. And you can select a plain map or an aerial-based map with labels or without, and a whole bunch of different things here. So let's use this one for the purposes of this sort of tutorial of how you use the basics of ARENI. So then we actually go over here to the key button, which is to add data. And I think Chris is indicating that you may or may not be able to actually see the full map. Hopefully everybody can actually see the full breadth of my screen.
Yeah, Ed, I'm watching it as an observer here, and if you've got the comments down the left-hand side, the web chat down the left-hand side, then you're not going to see the full screen. But there is a little arrow just to the right of that white comment box. If you click that, you should get full screen.
Great, thanks, Chris. So let's have a look at this Add Data button. So you click that and it brings up the data catalog. So you can see a whole bunch of information around electricity infrastructure, renewable energy resources, environmental information, cadastral boundaries, property boundaries, weather, all sorts. And our maps are located under electricity infrastructure. And then there's network opportunities. So we click that. And so everything within this folder is what ISS has been responsible for developing with its partners, and what Energy Networks Australia will be responsible for taking over. So you can see the four maps that the four key maps that we've described in the traditional network opportunity maps, and the new folder here of new generator connection capacity, which is broken down by transmission and distribution, power lines and substations. And this year we've also added some supporting information. So there's distribution boundaries, such as in terms of which distributors service which areas. There's transmission lines located by voltage, and our old 2016 constraint maps are there for past reference if you were wanting to compare with what was there from last year. So anything that's outside this Network Opportunities maps folder is actually maintained by Geoscience Australia or Data61 or a host of other data suppliers. So it's everything that's within the Network Opportunities folder that is Energy Networks Australia's responsibility. So let's click on available distribution capacity here. So that's our first map, and you can actually see in this info tab, you can find out everything you need to know about this layer. So there's a description of the data, what it does and doesn't show, a whole bunch of information on what happens when you click on the info boxes and what all of the cryptic things in there might actually mean. Some notes on data currency, the disclaimers, and you can just download that data directly in CSV format straight to your machine. It's an open data approach on National Map, so you can just click on that to do so. In this case, let's actually, I'll click on the plus to add that to the map, and I will also add proposed investment in there as well. So you can see I have two maps down here at the moment. So you can see that the legend has now appeared over this side, and there's also this display variable. So like I mentioned earlier, you can actually toggle between these to look at what you're viewing at. So where the default is investment year here on the proposed investment map, but I can look and see the level of the asset or the asset type, which ones are summer or winter, and the various drivers, including deferrable investment and the non-deferrable ones grey out. So that's the basic use of the AREMI platform. And so now what people often miss is this time slider bar. That's where it is down the bottom. It is there. People aren't necessarily used to finding it or seeing it. I'm going to turn off proposed investment, and I'll show you just how you can see some of the data actually changes over time in a particular circumstance. So here's sort of North Melbourne, north of Melbourne, where there's some zones that are not particularly constrained in 2016. But if you look in 10 years' time and you actually click on that, you can see that there's a constraint appearing. It's gone from green to red. And if we were to click on this particular area, you see that this is the AusNet distribution feeder data that they've experimented with putting in there this year, because their constraints tend to be not at the whole zone level, but actually underneath at the feeder level, and that's where their investments are happening. So that's why they're looking at putting a more granular level of data here. And you can see the load and capacity situation, and in this graph here, that you can see that it's about 2020 when that capacity gets exceeded. So you can actually even drag and drop your own data into the browser. So let's have a bit of a go at that. So I've just got any old CSV file lying around that happens to have latitude and longitude in it, for example. And I've just dropped that into drop that into the browser, and now you can see, I'll put us onto a more plain map, and we'll turn off distribution capacity. You can see a whole bunch of points here now. That is just something that's sitting on my computer, and I can use confidential data like that at any time and view it next to these public data sets. So that's a really valuable feature. And finally, there's also the functionality to be able to share any particular view, so that you can, if you want to embed something in your website, share a social media post, for example, you get a view in exactly the way you want it, with any underlying layers, any maps selected, and then you click share, and it will pop up, give you a preview of that. You can copy that link and paste it anywhere in the space of 20 seconds. So it's really powerful tool. So now that is the basic functionality of ARIMI. So now I'm actually going to take you through a couple of case studies. So let's clear everything off here. And we will start, let's start with a case study that weaves a whole bunch of these data sets together. So say that I'm a renewable energy developer or a local government or a community group looking to develop a new generation project to deliver jobs and investment to a particular local area. So let's start with our generation connection capacity. So we'll go here, we'll turn on, there's no data at the moment in the power lines, in the transmission power lines, but we'll turn on transmission substations, distribution power lines, distribution substations. And we'll flick that over here to our aerial. So this is the map that we saw on the slide earlier that's got all of our transmission and distribution connection capacity information. And say I am a community group or a local government that's particularly interested in Proserpine in Queensland. So I can type in my area, Proserpine, click that, and that will zoom in here. It's actually quite small because it adjusts, but this is the Proserpine area, and you can actually see here that there's a transmission connection point just outside of town. And when you click on that, you get a whole bunch of information from PowerLink, but crucially, we can see that the new generation indicative capacity is around 75 megawatts, which allows for a pretty reasonable scale of generator, be it a solar farm or a bioenergy facility. And if I need to know more, I can just go down and click on PowerLink's more information, and I get their generation capacity guide where there's a greater level of detail. And I'll close that down. And what if I actually want to know a bit about the local solar resource? This is where the other capabilities of ARIMI actually come into their own. So we want to click on renewable energy data, look at solar. There's a whole bunch of different data sets. Global horizontal exposure is one that will show you the quality of the solar resource in a particular location. So we can click on that and see that not amazing, but a pretty decent solar resource in that case, and you could factor that into your resource assessment from a project development perspective. And then let's also have a look if there are any other investments happening in the area. So I'll shrink some of these down. I'll toggle off our solar resource for the time being. And we'll turn on our proposed investments back in the network opportunity map and see if there's anything happening in this particular region. So this map's a little bit busy, so let's go to a plainer one, and you can actually see that, yes, there's actually a couple of investments in this particular location. So right at that connection point, we have one nominated from PowerLink here. Oops, that's here, this proposed investment at Proserpine. So you can see that there is a $10 million replacement investment that's happening in 2019. And from the comments that are here, you can see that there are some voltage regulation issues going on upstream. So for a solar farm, that could signal a potential role for voltage regulation services using appropriately specified inverter controls. So let's turn that one off for the minute, or it might actually mean that some form of more dispatchable generation might be of interest, like bioenergy as well. So I'll close that one down, and then we'll see, well, what does that actually translate to in dollars per kVA per year? How promising an opportunity is it? So let's have a look, and we know that it's happening in 2019. So we'll turn on the annual deferral layer. We'll click on 2019. Here's our region, our zone substation region that's connected to, and you can see that $10 million deferrable investment. And here's the table and graph of the deferral value. So it's about $80 per kVA per year, and requires about 11 MVA of support. So it needs to be a project of relatively substantial scale to achieve a deferral, and of moderate value. So it's not going to get a project across the line by itself, but could be an interesting additional value stream. And let's dig a little deeper to see, well, what is actually the peak circumstance that is driving this particular constraint? So let's toggle that off. We'll add another data set of our peak day available capacity. So we'll turn that one on. Your computer might start to struggle with 10 different data sets of these volumes loaded at any one time. But if you could actually click on this region, you can see the load curve that's associated with that particular constraint. And so you can actually see that it's a really long constraint. It's actually quite a broad peak, which is indicative of a transmission network issue rather than a peakier distribution network issue. And so that extends into the evening, which might mean there might be a role for battery storage, or there might be, or it might actually be something that's potentially more suitable to a bioenergy dispatchable generation case. So if you're actually wanting to say, well, let's go a little bit deeper, and I want to look at a particular site, you could go and have a look at your aerial, go down to the particular connection point, and say, well, where's actually a parcel of land that might be of relevance here? And there's a little measurement tool. You can say, well, between these roads, looks like it's a non-agriculturally used area. That's a couple of kilometres in that direction. And sort of 500 metres or so in that might be in the order of 65 hectares, about a 65 megawatt installation in that particular location, very close to this connection point. So, which we know might accommodate something in the order of 75 megawatts. So if I'm, or even if I'm a local government that owns a bit of land, I can drag and drop my own land parcel information into the browser and see how well that aligns with the connection point. Or if you really want to chase the deferral value opportunity, you can zoom out and you can see it's quite a heavy agricultural area. So if you were to, you could actually remove all of this to declutter it a little. But you could go and have a look at the bioenergy resources that are available here on the platform. You can click, have a look at where the waste management facilities are, for example. This map's a bit busy again. Let's make it a bit simpler. You can see that there's 7 or 8 different waste management facilities in the area, or look at Queensland-based data sets around forestry or livestock, for example. So that starts to give you a bit of a flavour for the kinds of things that you can do on the generation side with these new maps using a whole range of different data sets. And what I'm going to take you through now is a demand-side case study application that weaves the data sets together. So let's remove everything here. And I might be a Melbourne, interested in Melbourne in this particular case. And I will search for that and zoom elsewhere. So I might be a state government, a network business, or a private service provider looking to develop an integrated urban energy efficiency and load management program, like air conditioning efficiency upgrade linked with a device that allows a householder to remotely switch on their air conditioning so that they can pre-cool their house during the day using the spare energy from their solar panels, so that they don't need to turn on their air conditioning when they get home, driving a 6 p.m. network peak. So you might even be so bold as to throw in some home insulation or something if it wasn't so politically challenged. But you can do, if that's what you were looking at, we can go here and we'll load up our network opportunities proposed investment data set, like so. And we'll have a look to check what season is actually constraining these. And in almost all cases, it's summer, so that's a good start, which is compatible with the case that we're talking about. And then we want to see, well, which ones of these are actually deferrable? So we click our deferrable investment, and you can see a whole bunch of these grey out. So they're not the ones of interest. It's these ones over here that are the ones that might carry some value. So then we will see which ones of these translate to an annual deferral value. So we turn that on. And if I'm interested in developing a product or a project in 2018, ready for a 2019 market readiness, say, let's click on the 2019 map, and you can see a whole number of opportunities coming up here. So here's one of relatively high value, which you can click on. West Brunswick and City Power carries a fairly substantial value. I'm just going to click expand here, and that graphs that for us down below. Here's another one just over here in Fairfield. So that's another one that's got a fairly high value. Let's look at the annual deferral value there, and we can add that one to our map. And then there's also another this interesting one we looked at earlier from AusNet is another one that carries a pretty substantial value. So let's add that to our map, and you can now, to our graph, now you can see that sort of looking at a market readiness in these areas around 2019, 2020 is actually looking pretty good. But what we might want to know about those particular places is then how relevant is it to have, do they have the right load profile for load shifting away from a 6 p.m. peak? So let's just remove all of that clutter. I'll put our proposed investment back on again. And I'm going to put on our peak day available capacity to be able to find out this information about these, about the time of day that these are constrained. So I'm going to click down here. Hopefully, looks like my computer is struggling to catch up. Here we go. I've clicked on 6 p.m. as you can see, and so now we can look at some of the zones where we were seeing those constraints. Let's have a look at West Brunswick, for example. That's an interesting one. It does actually look like it probably has a 6 p.m. peak, but that might be a data anomaly. It might be that might actually be a load transfer that the network did on the peak day to actually ensure that a constraint didn't bite. So let's expand that one and look at our one up here, perhaps at KLO, and you can see that that one's absolutely perfect for a 6 p.m. It's a very peaky, residentially driven load curve. So that could be a really promising opportunity. And then you look at our other one that we identified in Fairfield, and we'll look at the available capacity there. And you can actually see the load curve there is completely different. It looks quite industrially driven with a very, very long sort of peak from morning to night. And we can expand on that. So probably what that tells you is that that particular zone is probably not the best thing. The Fairfield one is probably not the best application of this particular technology, and maybe you should focus the efforts on these other ones. So that gives you a bit of a flavour for what you can do with this. And then if you were wanting to sort of dig in a little more and go down to looking at the opportunity in, say, West Brunswick, you could turn on your Street View style map with labels. You can adjust your layer transparency so you can actually see what's underneath, and you can start looking at the streets, looking at the different types of buildings and developments, be it commercial, residential, and get a feel for what that program might actually look like. So, and if you then wanted to know any more about it, you can click on the information and find the annual planning report right here, straight through to the network business without having to trawl the web. And you can search for West Brunswick, and there you can find out a whole bunch of even more detailed information right at your fingertips. So that really gives you a flavour for how far you can get with open data in being able to develop opportunities and business models in this new centralised energy ecosystem. Now I might just switch back to our slide deck now that we've come to the end of the live demo. And just to make sure, and this is a crucial factor, that the map production timeline that Stuart was mentioning earlier, the annual investment and constraint maps, there's a distribution data release in December every year and transmission data release in July or June. And so there's 2 NOM updates of those particular map types a year, sort of coming in March and August, September, thereabouts. And then with our new generator connection opportunities, they're just updated as required anytime in an ongoing way. And finally, this is just the beginning of what you could do with an open source data approach in the sector. So where you could take this is tailoring for probabilistic planning methods. So networks generally only invest in demand management when an investment is actually in its plan and imminent, even when there's substantial load at risk. But we could actually be investing in reducing that load risk even earlier before we actually even got to planning and investment. So that's an interesting potential opportunity. Looking at increasing spatial or temporal granularity down to the street level. We also only really show the network issue. We don't so much show the solution here. And so it would actually be quite possible these days to be able to match network opportunity with cost-effective alternatives to network augmentation, saying, well, how much demand response can we get? How much energy efficiency is available within these customer types in these regions as we know it? There's a whole bunch of other issues around voltage management, for example, that are occurring and could actually be used on a platform like this to feed information to the market. And absolutely, at ISF and Energy Networks Australia are certainly keen to work with industry and others. It's an open source platform. We really want to get as many people providing information and data and analysis onto this as possible. So I think this is just a really exciting starting point, and hopefully we can go even further from here. So that's it from us in terms of the description of the project and the maps. I hope you enjoy them and find them useful. And here's our contact details there. And now I'll toss back to John, and he can take us through some Q&A.
Thanks very much, Ed. A very interesting presentation, and again, on behalf of Energy Networks Australia, really appreciate all your work on getting us to this point. We do have time for some questions and discussion now, so if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat box, and we'll deal with as much as we can in the time that we have available as we head towards 4 o'clock daylight time. Ed, there are a few questions in the chat box already that I think you can probably handle those. If you want to please read the question out before you answer, it'd be great, Ed. I'll just throw to you initially.
Okay, thanks, John. So I've got a question from Peter B in the first case. Do we have Western Australian data? So WA actually does have maps very similar to this, and that actually is also on the ARENI platform. And I think you just have to go to, I think it's actually hidden somewhere a bit strange under transmission, perhaps, even though it's distribution data. But they're not actually on the network opportunity maps themselves. But we have had a lot of interest from Energy Networks Australia's members in both Northern Territory and Western Australia now that it's come under the Energy Networks banner. So I think it's our hope that within the next 12 months we would be able to get WA data in a consistent format with everybody else's as well. Now, a second question that we've got here from Stephen M. We've got, will the energy and geospatial data be made available under an open source license? And is there an open API to access the raw data? And do we have to go through the maps to get the raw data? So there isn't an open API to access the raw data at the moment. You can use the pointer link on that info page that I showed earlier to be able to find where. You just click that link and you can download the actual data sets there. But there is a limitation, and it is that essentially there's the geospatial information that you see in these maps is, these zones, everything is represented in zone substation service territories. And those we don't have a license to distribute broadly and make downloadable. And if that's something that's of interest, and I'm pretty sure there is a lot of interest out there, then please let Energy Networks Australia know, and it would be something I think that would be a discussion to be had by the businesses. But at the moment, that is actually run on a vector mapping service by Data61, so it actually sits on the server side, and there is so that part is not, the spatial stuff is not downloadable. But as long as you actually have a list of asset codes for all of these particular zones, you can actually, even if you had a CSV that actually had the appropriate asset code in it and a piece of information, anyone can map to those zones on a REMI, as long as they have effectively the keys. And we would be quite keen actually to publish the list of asset names and codes, so that anyone could be able to represent their own data on a REMI in that way, at least in the interim, before any geospatial data was actually able to be downloaded. Now, we've got Mark Y saying, do you provide private training on these maps? We don't know. We've never done it before. But feel free, our contact details are on the end, so yeah, feel free to get in touch with us, and we can have a chat about that by all means. We've got, I've skipped one up here by Harry, which says, is all data entered and saved available to all users? So actually, I think I've effectively addressed that in the previous answer, unless I'm missing, I might be missing the point there. But so basically, everything is generally available through those downloadable links. The only thing on our side that isn't available is that the geospatial information. So and this will actually change as well. The network businesses under a rule change are going to be publishing a template data set of most of this information on an annual basis at the end of December for distributors, and that should be able to be accessed by anyone. Effectively, all of the input data will be publicly available. So we're just working through exactly how that will operate, how that will feed the maps, but it effectively means the input data rather than just the output data is also will also be available to everyone, which hasn't been the case before. We only have a license to put forward the outputs, not the inputs, but everyone is going to see the inputs as well, which is fantastic in the as of this December.
The security one there, Ed?
Yeah. Do you want to have a go at that one, Chris? I'm sick of talking.
Okay, so there's a question here from Matthew J. How are you looking to protect against active disruption and security considerations? This was something that came up on numerous occasions as we were developing the map. And so we've talked through it at some length. This is really an issue for the network businesses that they need to contend with all the time. For a lot of the infrastructure, it's pretty obvious where it is just by looking up or looking at the substations around the street. So there is, in some cases, I understand, we're led by the network businesses. So we publish whatever information they give us. And I actually think that some of the information isn't quite right in terms of locations of particular assets. So that for exactly that reason. So
there is actually, we give the data suppliers the option of whether or not we plot a particular proposed investment on the actual location, or whether or not we just plot it at the centroid, the center of any given polygon. So if a business doesn't want to disclose the location of its particular substation, then they just select that it's the center of the polygon instead of the actual location. So that doesn't necessarily, that means that some of those points aren't the true location. Most of them are, but it depends on the business and how they manage that. So this was actually something that Data 61, actually it was Data 61, I think, perhaps Geoscience Australia, it's been cleared. It actually went via the security services as an issue to resolve some years ago, to be able to put up a data set that I didn't show, which is the transmission lines information, which is also up there. I probably should have showed that. That has all of our major transmission infrastructure located on that. So that's one that is compiled and comes from AEMO.
Thanks, Ed. I just wonder if Stuart might like to comment quickly in terms of the broader security issues work that is happening. Stuart, maybe a brief comment.
In terms of what sense would you like me to go into that, John?
Oh, just a brief comment in the broader security, data security, cybersecurity work was what I was thinking, Stuart.
Sorry. Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot of work going on in the cybersecurity space, particularly in and around some of the work we're doing with coordinating some of those pieces of work. There's issues we're doing around standards and how that's going to be worked. So we've actually got a project we're kicking off to actually try and align ourselves with international standards on cybersecurity. We're also looking at doing assessments on that, but also looking at in terms of what we're doing in terms of how we actually manage data, where it sits, what it does, etc., etc. I probably won't go into that into detail now, but if people are interested in some of those pieces of work or actually want to contribute, get in touch with me separately. Just email me or give me a call.
Yeah, and we've made our contact details available. So thanks, Stuart. Ed, I'm just going to put you on the spot quickly. We haven't discussed this, but there's a suggestion that perhaps we could create some tutorial videos. This recording will be available on the NORM website, which I've put up a few times and will be circulated as well, which obviously gives a step through. But Ed, I assume it wouldn't be too difficult for us to arrange a tutorial, a few examples to have up on the website as well, perhaps just stepping people through an example.
That was actually precisely the reason I structured today in the way that we did. So we actually have it, because of the way we've approached it, we've got a chunk of information that explains what it is you're seeing in the maps. Hopefully we can just separate that as a non-explainer of what it is that the maps say and do. Then we've got an ARIMI tutorial generally, which is sort of about a 5-minute piece, and we can cleave that off. And then we're going to have these 2 case studies that I talked about at the end. And I think, precisely for that reason, we can actually just chunk them off in sort of 5-minute case study examples and have them up on online, so available for anyone. And if there's other things that are of value or interest, then please get in touch as well.
Great. Thanks, Ed. Look, that's all the questions that we've had come through. Being mindful of time. Let me just say on behalf of all the teams, again, a very big thank you to everyone that's made the time to join us today. We hope that's been informative. As Ed and Stuart and Chris have all said, this is not the end of the journey. This is an ongoing piece of work between networks and many stakeholders now to keep updating this information and to make this information transparent and usable. So if anybody has any feedback or questions, we would love to hear from you. We will, as I've said, make the recording available on the Network Opportunity Maps website, and we'll make the slides available as well. And our contact details have been circulated a few times. So we'd love to hear from anyone with any questions as well. So look, thanks again for everybody's time. Thanks to Ed, Chris, and Stuart, and to Arena and to Evil and his message as well. We hope you've enjoyed today's session, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.